Strich der Heere, was ich dir noch angesäche, so bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gar.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary Holy Land from the heathen. This is Matt Pegas.
And this is Dan Baltic.
And we are here with Cairo Smith. Now, Cairo, I have done an interview with you previously on my podcast, Strange Flows. In theory, and a lot of listeners to this will probably, some of the listeners to New Right will have heard that, or at least know that it existed. The intention was originally to do that pod kind of focused on film, and this pod focused on literature. But as we soon found when you were recording in my living room the other month, it's very hard when we're talking about sort of independently making movies and independently publishing literature. The two topics are heavily porous to each other. And so even though today, this being New Right, we're going to focus on literature, we'll probably, also end up talking a little bit about your work in film. The topics, as I said, are indeed very, very porous to one another. But that being said, the intention was to present you here as the writer that you are. You've published 2 books now. The first one was a collection of short stories back in December. I don't know. For some reason, I'm blanking on the name. It's called No Return. No Return. 6 stories from Lost Words. Sorry, that is not. Don't take that to be a lack of my investment in the book. I just, for some reason, I went totally blank there. But yeah, No Return, which is a collection of I would almost say science fiction, but you've characterized them better as perhaps slipstream, and we can get into what that means later on. Short stories dating back from earlier in your writing career. But the bigger announcement is it's June 15th. We'll probably post this in 1 or 2 days, but it's June 15th, and this is the release date of Komodo. I guess you'd call it I know that you've written at least one other novel, but this is your debut. This is your
first this is the debut, and that this is the first one that's actually making it to market. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that may be a sensible enough place to start. You sent me there's an excellent. I believe you took this turn of phrase from Passage Press. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a deluxe patrician edition, a very, very large hardcover. Curtis Yarvin's Unqualified Reservations, sized edition of Komodo that has been released today, and you were nice enough to send it to me, so people can get that. There's also a paperback, but if you just want to kind of pitch the physical product, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about what the book's about.
Sure, yeah. I do believe that Patrician was yoinked fully from Passage. I mean, I took high school Latin. I feel like I've been pretentiously calling things patrician for at least 10 years. So it just kind of seemed right. What better way to get people to spend more money than by appealing to their snobbery? So in that sense, it is a very good, high quality print. I'm very happy with it. We did 2 different tests before we really got the colors and the finish dialed in, and it's a comfortable read. I personally hate when the printing is so close to the interior binding on a large book that you have to really sort of spread the book more than it perhaps wants to be spread to see the interior text. So I made sure that wasn't the case with this.
Nice.
And as for everything else you said, I mean, I feel like I don't even need to shill because you covered it pretty well. So thank you, Matt, for that intro, and thank you everybody for listening. That book is out today. As far as a paperback, there is not currently a paperback.
Oh,
I think
okay.
that we will
I stand
probably
corrected.
do
Yeah.
one. In a few months, maybe 5 or 6 months. There's some things we got to work out first. But there will be a paperback if you are not, you know, erudite and aristocratic enough to handle the hardcover. So yeah, and as you mentioned as well, we have done one of these sort of literary talks on air before, but certainly I've never done it with the two of you gentlemen at the same time. So that's sure to be an experience.
Absolutely. Oh man, we're already treading into some dangerous water here. But yes, Dan Baltic, of course. The first podcast we did was just us solo, but now we have Dan here, which is
Good to be here.
special, because Nutcranker was the book that led you to this corner of the internet. It was your
Yes.
maiden voyage, your
You might
virginal.
say it took your cherry.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was but a an innocent internet user. I had my depths of image board, degeneracy and horror, and then I had my very bland big four trad pub literature and you know uh autofiction about second gen immigrant experiences, and then
Mhm.
Dan took that sort of missing middle and just blew it wide open, and I've never been the same.
Nutcracker deflowered me as well, so you're in good company.
Great, great. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
no,
I,
we
I
talked to yeah,
actually
go on.
I got to see Dan read a section of this book live at a Strange Flows event, which was also my first time meeting him. And I just want to say, um, I feel like I got to appreciate the prose all over again, because
Likewise.
I had
Yeah.
already read it at that point, but it's something about his delivery and the way that he was sort of leaning into the irony and the wink of it. It was incredibly charming
Well, thank you.
and skillful.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great book. So I'm
I
sure if
Yeah.
you're listening to this, you read it or you have read it. But if for
yeah, I
some
do not read in public very often, so I wonder, sometimes how it went, if the delivery was, it sounds good in my head, but I don't know necessarily how it's being received. But yeah, that's great to hear because I think the delivery is very important, and it's important into the voice of the story itself.
I
So,
would
I mean,
agree. Yeah.
I hear Nutcracker in a specific voice in my head. And I hear, we all hear fiction in a voice that we've created. And so it is sometimes jarring when you hear an author read from their novel and it's not the voice that you expect. And I'm happy it was the voice that you expected.
Oh, it was not the voice I expected at all. In fact,
Oh,
I think we sort of apply our own voices to
Yeah.
reading when we read, at least I do. And so actually part of what was so great was getting to hear it anew again with yours. Somebody was trying to get me recently to record the audiobook for Komodo myself, and while I was flattered, I just, you know, part of wisdom is recognizing your strengths and limitations, and I don't think I would be up for that. I do come from a family of actors, voice actors, so I've sort of,
Makes you more
I prefer to
Stuff to
hypercritical.
live
stay,
up
Yeah.
yeah,
to.
makes me more hyper conscious about those kinds of things. But we may do professional voiceover for an audiobook at some point if we
Cool.
sell enough copies.
Yeah, no, I would
Awesome.
I would definitely be interested in that. Yeah, just to wrap up the Nutcracker of it all, obviously I've been a co-host of Dan's for a while. I was probably one of the first readers of Nutcracker, and I've reread it since, and all that. But I would agree that you kind of hear it with new ears when the author reads it. I think for some books it's not that important to hear the author read it, but I think with Nutcracker, there was a very specific Dan Baltic comedic voice, and that sort of, not that again, as you said, Kyra, I think you do apply your own voice to a book, which is especially interesting with a book like Nutcracker, where it kind of invites the reader to satirize himself. Um, but so there's a value in applying your own voice, but I definitely think, there's something, there's a very specific, Dan has a performative comedic style as well that runs
Well,
through his
thank
tweets
you.
and his book. So it was I heard it not just from Cairo, but from others that people really enjoyed that reading.
Oh, wow,
Um,
I didn't even
yeah,
know
go on.
that. I mean,
Yeah.
I knew people had fun. But yeah, no, that's great to hear that people like the reading.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely. And yeah, on the point about like, applying your own voice. I think probably when I read it, I found the book funny, but I almost was like taking some of what Spencer was saying a little bit more seriously than I should have. So I think that was part of it, is like realizing just how comedic this thing was. But to dial back to Komodo, I've said I really, you sent it to me, Cairo, and I really wish that I've been able to like read the entire thing. It is
Oh
quite
no,
long.
I'm fully aware that it's
Yeah.
basically like sending someone a fruitcake because, it's a beautiful edition and, I stand by the book. I think it's a good book, but it is 125,000 words. So, it's not an afternoon read by any
No,
means. So
it's
I
something
totally
that,
understand.
yeah, that
It's
I'll have
very
to find
long.
my way into. But that from what I did read, which was the first, basically not much more that just like the first couple chapters, which are also available for free on your
They
Substack.
are.
I think I went a
Yes.
little further than that, but it is good, and everything I've ever read by you is good. You are a very good writer on the sentence level. And it's kind of interesting to see, some of the stuff you've written more recently, and we'll talk about that. Is I don't know if I'd say it moves away from the slipstream and science fiction stuff, but Komodo is very much not even just slipstream, but science fiction.
It is. It's fully
Yeah,
genre fiction. It's in that 20th century tradition. It has spaceships and, laser guns and, well, not laser guns, but regular guns and, you know,
yeah, and
that
to
kind of
to
thing.
cite one influence of yours, which gets flack on this corner of the internet, but I think we can kind of own it, and I definitely appreciate the angle you're coming at it from. You're a big Star Wars fan, and by Star Wars, we're probably mostly talking about the original series, not necessarily all these Disney spin-offs they're doing. But I look, people will make fun of Star Wars a bit and Star Wars fans, but like I grew up a huge Star Wars fan myself, and I think it's really cool that you actually went for it in terms of writing like a grand space opera. Like there's some genre fiction on this corner of the internet, but not necessarily any. I can't think of another example of something that really kind of goes truly for the genre thing and truly specifically for whatever subgenre Star Wars is, where it's kind of grand and operatic.
Yeah.
It seems like a really cool element of Komodo.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I would say I probably love Star Wars, although I think being a fan of a science fiction property means just getting your heart broken over and over
Right,
again.
of
I
course.
think, I feel like I'm also a big Star Trek guy, and
Yeah.
I have this sort of like Sisyphean experience of like, what do I want to watch today? I'm going to watch Star Trek, and I'm going to open up some show on Paramount. I'm like, oh, this is really bad. And
Yeah.
then
Well,
I try a different one, and it's like, but the love is still there.
oh yeah, especially with Star Trek, I get that. Like for me,
Yeah.
Star Wars has been stamped out a bit, but just by just I don't even want to be like this average cliche right of center hater on the new Star Wars stuff, but it's not even that it's like woke or that ideology. It just
Yeah,
seems bad. The
it's
special
really
something
bad.
about the special effects turns me off. Something about the fact that that whole fandom, which was once genuinely like a nerdy fandom, has been turned into this weird mass market thing. Just fundamentally depresses me. Star Trek, I'm less of a follower of. It seems like maybe it hasn't been quite as beaten to shit, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's complicated. I'd say it's in a very similar position to Star Wars right now as far as what goes on in the writer's room. I think the difference is that
The merchandising isn't quite
they
as you
still do
yeah.
care about the sort of the look of it, the VFX, and not sort of not making it look like plastic,
Mm.
or green screen. Star Wars, they use a lot of this thing called the volume. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
No, but I think I know exactly what you mean when you talk about the look of it. I mean, that's to
yeah.
me that's as bad or worse than the ideological turn.
So what they do basically, it's like green screen, except instead of a green screen, it's this very high resolution LED wall, and
Mm.
they essentially render the background in real time in like Unreal Engine, and they put it on that wall, and then so they're filming normally, but you have this CGI background behind the actor, and
Yeah.
it gives it this very,
It looks like a video game.
it looks like somebody standing in front of a TV because that's what it is. Right? They're
Yeah.
not in the world at all. And the sort of the more they lean on that, the more problems they have. And look, here we are talking about film now on the
Yeah, I knew
writing
this would
show.
happen, but there you go. No, we'll circle back squarely to Komodo in a second. The
Yeah.
fandom question is kind of interesting, because, um, yeah, as you said, being a science fiction fan, being a fan of a science fiction IP is to have your heart broken over and over and over
Yeah.
again.
I see
I will
Warhammer
vouch
people
for what's that?
experiencing
Sorry.
that. I see Warhammer people experiencing that a lot. I'm not a
Yeah.
Warhammer guy, but I do feel sympathy for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be that. Like, I will that I'll set about Star Wars. We can circle back to Komodo, but I've never actually gotten a chance to talk about this on New Right, and may not again for some time. So it is kind of interesting. Like, people when I was a kid, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, and then we'll move on to Star Wars. When I was a kid, like when we probably we're similar. You're a bit younger than me, but like basically people made fun of the Phantom Menace and stuff, which were the ones I grew up with, and I think those ones kind of hold up. I think that it really only went downhill after Disney, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
So I love the Star Wars prequels. I love the Star Wars prequels. I think that there are a lot of really there are choices that are somewhere between ponderous and disastrous.
Right.
Um, a lot of the effects are really rough. It looks really strange in a lot of places. The acting is very stilted in this way that sort of it kind of gets better the more you watch it because you sort of give in to its weird rules, you know? Like
Yeah.
it's not realistic. It's sort of like hyper stylized in this way.
Mm.
I will say, honestly, I think that part of the reason that those movies have gotten better over time is because they were made with completely pure, like honest vision by someone who actually has an appreciation for history and like human existence and like
Yeah.
sort of
I would agree.
stories that escape the like myopia of the 21st century sort of, managerial class paradigm and actually engage with like
Timeless
human existence on a deeper level.
warrior
Like, yeah,
elements.
you're
Yeah.
watching this stuff about like there, the Phantom Menace is mostly about trying to free somebody from slavery. And it's not slavery in this concept of like slavery as a rhetorical tool for political purposes. It's like he's actually engaging with this idea of like, oh, slavery in the very like mundane way that it existed through most of human history. Like he's like obviously read
And
more
still
than
exists
one
now.
book, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
Yeah.
clearly. That's a really good way of putting it, and it contrasts pretty starkly with
Yeah.
the Disneyfied stuff. Which I've only seen, I think, the core three movies there. I haven't watched any of the series. Maybe they're not as bad as I'm thinking, but yeah,
No,
again,
they're pretty
the
bad.
look
They're pretty bad,
the look
with
of
the
it
exception
alone
of
turns me off, and yeah, they just start to deal in more whatever. What did you just say? The managerial class? I don't know,
oh, yeah, I don't know.
bourgeois. I don't even know. I don't quite
Yeah.
have the vocabulary for it, but I know what you mean. Pettier matters.
Uh-huh.
What's her name? Who's in Blueville? Laura Dern saying like, "Oh, you, whatever." We don't need to rehash everything that's wrong with the newer three Star Warses, but yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
I'd say they're well read. The prequels are well read and you can tell, and that's the antithesis of what's coming out of the Disney machine these
I
days.
think that's very astute. Yeah, and I'm famously, friend of the pod, not actually friend of the pod, influence on this whole sphere. Camille Paglia was very complimentary of Revenge of the Sith, especially. And I think I don't think I've actually read her article on that, but I think she probably would have had similar things to say as what you're saying. It's not all relevant to Komodo because, Komodo is, of course, also well read. And, I read enough of it to start to glean some of the themes. Some of these themes are also spelled out in the various promotion you've started to do for it and your great article writing on the night shift,
Mm.
which we will talk about, where you kind of get into some of the inspirations behind it. So one of the key concepts is about a what's the term? PMC.
Yeah, private military contractor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you're kind of writing about, and this was before the Floyd riots and everything. You're
yeah.
kind of writing about, you wanted to write about, well, you want to write about a couple things, and I'll let you take it away. But you wanted to write about corporations and the way, corporations grow and eventually become like almost imperial. And also this specific idea to write about private policing, which is again before it became a hot button political issue. If you just want to talk about, yeah, you can even take this question simpler. What is Komodo about, and what inspired you to write it? My very, very basic literary questions here, but go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, that's a big one. I think Komodo came for me at a very particular point in my writing that I actually kind of look back on with nostalgia because um, I had written a novel that I sort of tried to write to trends. And it was something that it, came from the heart for me. It was a young adult, sort of a steampunk adventure at the time that genre was sort of near its height, which was 10, 11-ish years ago. And I wrote it, and it was pretty good. And I took it out to agents, and I did some revisions, and it didn't end up going anywhere. And then I wrote some short stories, and I got some short stories published, and I got a feel for what getting published feels like and what it means. And I was like, you know what? I'm ready. I feel like my prose is ready, and I just want to write completely what I want to write. I'm going to do the exact opposite of what I did before, and I'm not going to write to market at all.
Yeah.
And so I just sort of started sketching down like what was interesting to me at that point. And I was very preoccupied with ISIS attacks in the West. Those
Yeah.
made it very, it's funny. At the time I felt like an adult, but I was definitely still sort of forming my consciousness and my identity. I think well, I would have been 20, 21-ish.
It was like
And
2016, 2017.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I remember sort of deep diving into the Bataclan massacre
Hmm.
and sort of wishing I hadn't, but you can't look away at a certain point when you're curious enough and you're online enough, and sort of thinking about like the idea of how do I even put this? It just felt like certain elements of like Western like governance and leadership were a little either asleep at the wheel or just sort of too fearful or naive to recognize the way the 21st century was going.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, but a a civilization is not just its government. Like Western people, and more than that, people who align with the Western Bloc, including first, second, third gen immigrants who, are not even from Western countries. And I think for me, it's very interesting to see a lot of like people from non-Western countries sort of falling into this part of the internet and becoming in their own way like very zealous, like Western Civ, uh, defenders and advocates.
Yeah.
It's a very specific like flavor of person. Um, and I started to think, okay, like if our managerial class, whatever you want to call it, is not going to have the vision and the will to power, although I didn't have those words in my head at the time, these were just the feelings, to like essentially guide the ship, like who's going to do it? Are we going to
Yeah.
sort of reach the South Africa state where Peter Thiel is selling you police services for like, $300 a month? Citizen will come in like a cyber truck and, respond to your home invasion. What is going to happen here?
Yeah.
And I didn't have answers. I just wanted to explore the questions.
No,
So
it's
that's what it's
fascinating.
about.
Yeah, and what's interesting is yes, these major, although we just had one in Moscow, but these major ISIS attacks on the West were sort of a product of that moment. But
Yeah.
ISIS aside, I would say we're still, and maybe even more so, squarely in that moment you describe, and these are still open questions as um, the efficacy of Western governments seems less and less, and it's sort of Yarvanpilled, I guess, in a way, and bringing up Peter Thiel. But you have these corporations, and not that I'm going to sing their praises too highly, but even like something like Apple or something, where it's like, well, like maybe I would take the Apple police force, to guard my home. I think these things are still highly, highly relevant, and so I look forward to reading more of Komodo, and I at some point, maybe I'll be doing a review. I don't want to promise it too early because I feel like it could take me a while to read. As you say, it's a long book, but I like what I read so far, and I'm certainly these themes resonate. The other thing I was going to say, not to interject my own work too much, but even though Dragon Day is almost no, I went to the opposite, but a very, very different kind of book as Komodo. I also, and I read about this in my addendum, which is in the Black Album. Yeah, I remember the ISIS attacks of 2016, 2017 having a pretty profound influence on me as well. Maybe in my case, it was something a little more pyrotechnic and just about the explosions of them all, and the fact that there was this violence underlying things became this more psychological sort of inspiration behind Dragon Day,
Yeah.
less so than anything about real politic or geopolitics or the issues you're talking about, which are better suited to science fiction. But just generationally, I do think it's interesting. I think, yeah, a sense of governments being asleep at the wheel, on a sense, and in my case, a strong sense that there was this violence and rancor below things that we were trying to tamp down, became really influential.
What's interesting to me is that PMCs, mercenaries, what have you, it's narratively, it's a very appealing topic. It's a very appealing, setup for a masculine lead character, and it's very, in a way, serendipitous that the current political situation has created a kind of yearning for, okay, let's have privateers,
Yeah.
step in and figure this out. And yeah, how did it feel writing about a mercenary?
Yeah. Yeah. It's you bring up a very interesting point because I you know I'm I'm writing this, and these are very, as you said, they're masculine, it's classic boys adventure themes, sort of done in this literary way, but there's still this very like, you know, men's adventure fiction element here. And, look, who is this? This protagonist, is a woman, and, not just a woman, but a woman who's pretty defined and ostracized by her ethnicity, which on its surface seems like the exact opposite of what we're doing here. And
Yeah, I see.
Well, hey, this thing of online publishing has been going on long enough
yeah.
that anyone can flip any script, and I think it's interesting. But go on. Yeah.
Um, and it's how do I say this without spoiling everything? I guess I'm trying to say there's sort of there's sort of an unnaturalness to the status quo in this book at the beginning with the way things start that sort of lends itself to being toppled and
Hmm.
thrown into chaos. And part of that is this character and also the people around her sort of being put into these very alienating roles, sort of that are downstream of like a late imperial bureaucracy that is not giving really anybody in the solar system in this case what they need. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of Basra is the character. Her journey is like in this very sad, like self-defeating way, she is searching for a life that's going to make her happy and fulfilled, you know?
Yeah.
Which realistically probably just means like having somebody in her life that she cares about and cares about her and she can communicate with. And because of everything that has been sort of imposed on her by her life, by society, by exterior expectations, by the role that she's had being, a law enforcement officer, ends up sort of just, well, destroying the world instead.
Yeah.
Trying to be this, this Steve Jobs or this Caesar or whatever this role model is in her head that she's aping, and emulating.
Yeah.
With
No,
with this,
I
yeah,
I hear how you don't you probably don't want to say anything in too much detail
yeah,
because that would probably spoil the plot, but it's certainly interesting. This is a little bit of a not cringe at all, but I guess slightly cliche reference point. But I'm reminded of that Adam Curtis documentary. I think it's called Hyper Normalization, where he's kind of talking
yeah,
about the vibe of the late Soviet Union, and it's actually been a while since I saw it. But what I took from it was that the vibe of the late Soviet Union, no one taking the bureaucracies and public morality seriously, and how that mirrors very well onto our own times in the West with these kinds of bureaucratic jobs that are just kind of tinged with the cynicism, I suppose, and a cynicism about the sort of public morality. And it seems like Komodo kind of leans into a science fiction take on that, which is definitely interesting. Or you can comment on that, but
yeah.
if you have any, yeah,
There's a good documentary by the BBC called Trauma Zone about the fall of the Soviet Union, and it's not any narration or anything like that. It's literally just archival footage, but it's sort of like, yeah, you see this process of, where the state is kind of on its last legs, but people are still going through the motions of believing in it, and then it can just no longer run under its own power, and in a way that's like, in this sort of like, Baptist way, it's like this is a necessary collapse
yeah,
because it actually allows this kind of vital impulse to survive and beat, a failing state, but at the same time, without this pretense of like, say like Soviet communism or whatever it is, the American democracy to believe in, you get a very cynical and sort of like dog eating dog follow-up period, right? Where essentially the spoils are just being looted from
Yeah.
what came before anything new can be built. And it's like, do we really want to live through that? Like, would that really be
Yeah.
fun
Oh
for
yeah.
us? You
Right, and
know?
as Yarvin has kind of pointed out, I think BAP also sort of acknowledges it's like this kind of managed decline period could kind of go on almost indefinitely. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be like a 5 or even 10 year collapse and reemergence of vitalism. It could be a dark ages. Is like part of what we have to
Yeah.
understand. Now,
I
it
mean,
seems like in Komodo we do get a collapse, but you don't just spoil.
yeah, I mean, I feel like you could be in 600s or 700s AD Eastern Rome and think, well, wow, we're really on the decline. And it's like, yeah, they are, and they're going to keep plugging along for another 800 years, right?
Absolutely, yeah. These things can go on indefinitely. And when you kind of bring bureaucracy in, even if it's bureaucracy that there's a lot of public cynicism about, I mean, that's part of it's literally the managed decline is kind of
Yes.
the hyper normalization, as it were, of all these different groups that are brought in to sort of do the work, as it were, and it's kind of not of this very not life affirming thing. But kind of excited to dig more into that when I actually read Komodo. Um,
It strikes me,
yeah, go on.
oh, sorry, but yeah, this is just an insight that if I don't say it, I'm going to forget. It strikes me that at this moment, there's a great narrative possibility in speculating about the decline and future of the West, what have you, and the mainstream publishing industry and mainstream entertainment industry more generally cannot produce
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
that is truly nuanced or insightful about this for obvious reasons. And so you have stuff like, admittedly, I haven't seen Civil War. It looks, vaguely interesting, but I mean, the plot and all, it's so divorced from what actually is happening that it's just, like, well, why even make a movie like this if it's not going to, be tied into, you might as well set it in an alternate reality.
Sure.
And our side, this side of Twitter, what have you, whether you're right or left, if you've kind of abandoned mainstream credibility or what have you, you are able to actually comment on, speculate about the future of the world, the West, what have you, honestly. And that's a powerful, arrow to have in your quiver.
I'm gonna just for a second log on and be Civil War movie defender here.
I was gonna say, I
Um,
actually was going to invite you to because you are a Civil War defender, and they're
yes,
hard to
I
come by.
am.
I
I
am too.
am.
I'll go on the record, but
I
you
mean, I
go ahead.
haven't
Yeah.
seen it, to be
Uh-huh.
fair. I've just seen clips and the plot, but go on.
So I was with you guys fully and I think the mark here, honestly, I think that it's an A24 movie, right? And honestly, I think part of the reason that that movie didn't really find its audience and is having this kind of reaction is because the people marketing it are so indoctrinated into this sort of, managerial miasma that we were talking about earlier that they don't even know what it's about. They literally produced this movie and they don't know what it's about. But I will say, I really enjoyed Civil War. I think it was there's a lot going on that was not billboarded, and I
Yeah.
think I would not call it a left-wing movie at all. And I would say that Alex Garland, the director, is probably I would not call it like a right wing movie in the sense of like, oh, we should have a like right wing revolution and the day of the rope and that would be good. Like he's
Yeah.
definitely saying like civil war is bad,
Yes.
but he's saying it in this way that is like very um very scalding toward journalists sort of aligned with the sort of the Western forces element in the movie, which is essentially, the whole movie is this large contingent of rebellious California is essentially racing to like lynch Trump, you know, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and these sort of like very, very sociopathically vain and naive journalists that are trying to get the high of capturing that happening. And I think the fact is, if that were a novel, it would have been a lot more clear, and I actually think it would have been a lot more effective in communicating its ideas. I
Mm.
think that we have this thing where, like, Dan, as you said, if there are people who want to engage with these ideas and like want to actually not even critique, but just like consider the fate of the West in like mass media, they have to do it in this, it's almost like, it's like trying to be like gay in Hollywood in like the 50s. Like it
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
be a semi-open secret, but you have to do it with so much plausible deniability
Yeah.
because there are all these people in the machine who are just going to completely shut down your shit if you actually say anything that they can tell is interesting, right?
Writing between the
Yeah.
lines in the Straussian sense,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
Matt and I have talked about a bit. You're probably familiar with the term, or well, yeah. So I mean, essentially, it means saying what you want to say without directly saying it. And to my mind, I mean, again, I haven't seen Civil War. I wasn't clear that that was what was going on,
There's a
but
counter
I will
argument.
take your
I
word
mean,
for
that's my
it.
interpretation. There's definitely
Yeah.
a counter argument to be made.
I'm not 100% positive what my interpretation is. Maybe I wouldn't have as strongly, not even right wing, but like strongly a anti-journalistic take on it as you. But I definitely think it's like an interesting interpretation. I think the what stands out for it, and I am a defender of it. Not that I've done so publicly much, but I guess I'm doing it here. Um, is that yeah? I think it's really because it is so you have California and Texas on the same side kind of thing. Um, because it is so is slipstream even a word I could use? Because it is so no, I guess slipstream almost the opposite of slipstream
Alternate
because
reality?
it is so alternate reality to ours. It's
Sure.
really hard to say exactly what they're saying. Although I certainly think people who are saying there's no relevance to our current political situation are being willfully like not like obviously
I
Nick
mean,
Offerman is supposed to be Trumpian.
yeah,
Um,
and it's just insane to me that people don't understand it. I mean, literally the very first line of the movie, just because you haven't seen it, Dan, is Nick Offerman, who's I mean, he was run on Parks and Rec. He's like the
Yeah.
yeah,
probably most famous fictional libertarian. He starts out, he's preparing for a speech, and he's going, "They're saying it's the greatest military victory in the history of military victories, maybe ever." Like that's like literally like lifted from
yeah.
a Trump speech,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I'm not even exactly sure what my interpretation is, but what I will
Uh-huh.
defend it on is purely aesthetic grounds. I mean, I thought like the battle scenes were fucking great. And I for
Oh, and the
some reason I
sound
didn't
so good
oh
in
yeah, the
Atmos. Oh my
sound. I'm
God.
glad I saw it in theaters. And like for
I'm
some
geeking
reason,
out.
even though it's a movie called Civil War about American Civil War, I I don't know. I think what surprised me, and this maybe reflects interestingly on the political moment and my own perceptions thereof. I assumed that the movie would just end in gridlock. Like I thought that the whole message would be like, oh, Civil War is like this long protracted thing of constant fighting. It's like, no, they're really gonna go and invade Washington D.C. And that was extremely not that I like Washington D.C. I have friends there, but there was some there's this I don't remember who wrote about it like. Los Angeles is often just like treated very poorly in movies. Like there's so many movies about LA getting
Yeah,
destroyed. I had
yeah,
never seen it happen to Washington, and I really enjoyed just like the march on the Washington Monument and all this stuff. And
yeah,
yeah, just it was really impressed by that. So yeah, just kind of purely on aesthetic grounds.
yeah,
Mm.
I'll defend it as a really entertaining and good watch. And yeah, then the other thing is that the way it shows kind of before they get to DC, the way it shows sort of rural Virginia, rural
hmm
mid-Atlantic. Just this is pretty neither here nor there, but I can't think of another movie that shows so much of that kind of rural part of the country in a way that really, because I grew up in Pennsylvania. So yeah, just those backcountry roads, like you don't see it that much. And then of course you have the poetic other element, which was really well rendered, in terms of special effects and whatnot, of the car wrecks and everything. Like
Yeah.
this, what I thought that was really well done because I think that's what it all. What I do think, even if the sides don't make sense, I do think a civil war in the United States
Yeah.
would kind of look like that. And
I,
that
I,
was
I feel bad going on too much about a movie Dan hasn't seen, so maybe we'll circle back to this at another time. I had some stuff I wanted to talk about Nutcracker, unless you're sick of talking about Nutcracker,
Oh
Dan.
no, I always love talking
Okay,
about Nutcracker.
cool. Is that okay, Matt? Can I
Oh, of
jump
course,
into a
yeah,
little of
please,
that?
yeah.
Okay. So this is my first question. Um, was there ever a world where it was called something else? Because, Nutcracker, it's obviously this large component of the plot, but it's not like Nutcracker isn't the hero. So where did that come
Yeah.
from, and did you consider other things?
Interestingly, it was almost always called Nutcracker because it's based on a short story. Well, so the short I initially did the college campus stuff. That was the true like first chapter. But then I wrote the confrontation at the Nutcracker offices, and this was part of a short story workshop that I was in. One of those. If you're a professional in a big city and you want to write, you can take a class in the
Yeah.
evening with a published novelist, and they workshop your stuff with you.
Yeah.
So I had to write two short stories, and one was the campus one was the confrontation at the Nutcracker offices. And so they were tied. It was Spencer in both of them. But yeah, so from the get-go, like I didn't conceive of it necessarily as a novel at the time, but Nutcracker was based into it. So when I actually started writing the novel in earnest, which was right after COVID hit and my industry had ground to a halt, so I had essentially every day was free, more or less. So I had hours to write every day, started writing it as, a novel,
Yeah.
and I kept Nutcracker as, it was the working title, but also, it became obvious to me that this will be the title of the novel. So pretty much from the get-go, Nutcracker was in there because I had written the Nutcracker chapter was one of the first to be written, though it was revised as I went along.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That makes sense. Well, I want to thank both of you guys, by the way, although, I read Nutcracker earlier, so this was really what did it. But you guys did a lot to sort of break my, um, what am I trying to say? Sort of break my blind respect for literary agents and publishers as
Mhm.
uh,
Good.
determiners of what is worth publishing, because both of your work is so transparently good, and not only good but fresh, and serving this group of people online in this way that is really, it's relevant, it's exciting, it's innovative. And I literally had a light switch moment where I was reading Nutcracker and I was like, if this had to go to an indie press, why am I letting my queries decide, how confident I am in my own work and its merits? Was
Absolutely.
there a moment for you, Dan, where you sort of said fuck it, or like what was your emotional timeline there?
Hmm.
So originally, I had intended for Nutcracker to be published in the traditional publishing industry.
Yeah.
I wrote it before I was really Dan Baltic. I knew I would use a pseudonym, but I had not even picked one yet. And yeah, so I wrote query letters. I shopped Nutcracker around to agents, many agents, probably 20, 30. No response. I mean, responses to say no, basically. But that was it. And, in retrospect, I realized that probably that should have been expected.
You probably kind of
because
feel like Spencer almost in a way
oh yeah, no, I
doing
mean
that.
I
It's
did
kind of like
actually.
it's kind of like a femdom humiliation exercise to query these
Yeah,
like 24, 25-year-old English BAs who are basically just going to look at your first couple pages and they're not even reading the prose, they're just going to say ew on like sort of a hyper socialized level, you know?
basically. I mean, it also I think is a function of like yes, I will so here like if they're publishing Welbeck, they're publishing other like I don't think Nutcracker itself, that the fiction, the prose was necessarily unpublishable.
No.
Maybe like some of it, had to be toned down. But the fact was, I was never going to find an agent because any junior agent, like yes, would have a kind of like natural lib, like oh, this is right wing, this is gross, whatever. Or they would, just simply have, and I mean, I think this probably accounts for it as much as anything, a self-preservation instinct where they say,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
okay,
That's what it
I'm,
is.
yeah, I'm out, I'm new, I'm low on the totem pole. I don't want to be the incel agent. I
Yeah.
don't want to be the fascist
And here's
agent.
the thing. I mean, I don't think to me, Nutcracker is not any of those things on its face. I mean, I said to Matt a while ago, I'm like, this is, you're hard pressed to even call this a right-wing book in any way
No.
because
Yeah.
this
Yeah,
is such a skewering of all these things. I mean, in
absolutely.
like just so stupid. It's like, you know what it is? They're so fearful of engaging with ideas and possibly accidentally bringing them into like the Overton window
Yeah.
that they won't even run like a satire of something that they're against, which on paper you would think that they would be for. But it's like it literally is sort of the Voldemort treatment, right?
It
And so you have
is.
this whole aspect of like modern culture, for people who I would say are like, under 40, that is just like completely excised from traditional media. Yeah.
Absolutely. Liberals, liberal women even, they have enjoyed Nutcracker.
Yeah.
I have a friend, a writer who is I would call her, and she would agree with it, a feminist writer, a prison abolitionist, and
Wow.
she read Nutcracker, and she's like, "Oh, I see a lot of myself in Spencer."
So
Yeah.
would she be in favor of some sort of alternative rehabilitation for Spencer instead of his stint in the big house?
I suppose so. Yeah,
Spoilers, I guess.
I would hope. I mean, if we're
Okay.
gonna
Yeah.
be consistent with,
Yeah.
unless it's like prison abolition for me, but not for
Well,
thee,
it's like
Yeah.
that.
which
It's like the
might be the
howling.
case.
It's like the howling mutant tweet that I think it was howling mutant recently was like, yeah, everyone's anti-cop until I'm jacking off in their backyard at 3 a.m.
So
Oh,
true.
Classic
yeah,
mutant behavior.
yeah.
Have you guys met that poster in real life? I'm almost
Not in real
You
scared
life, but we
to.
did do a
I
great
think
episode with
we
him like 2 years
You
potentially
ago.
have
did.
definitely we did do an episode with him,
Yeah.
and we've
Oh wow.
potentially been at parties that he's been at.
Oh, for
And I
real?
don't know what he
Yeah,
looks like, and I haven't met him, but I mean, we know people who know
Wow.
him.
yeah. No, he's
They
great.
live among
Yeah,
us. I think the Dan Baltic Twitter is art in and of itself. I mean,
Oh, thank
it's
you. Yeah.
so tongue
yeah,
in
absolutely.
cheek. It's so like you've created this, I don't want to say character, but you've created this persona that's like so charming and yet such an obnoxious bore at the same time in just like the perfect way. I really and you have your sort of rotating cast of the ancillary characters, the junior associate, right? And the intern,
Absolutely.
like
And we're
you've
hearing.
created a
Yeah,
whole it's almost like a weekly comic strip in tweet form,
it is.
of
Oh,
like
thank you. Yeah.
what are the antics that Dan and his crew get up to,
We're hearing more and more
There's
from Baltic Bangers, who I guess kind of is the junior associate every week.
yes,
It's quite
yes,
funny. Yeah,
Baltic,
his wife is a
he
character. Yeah,
Yeah, he is, he's doing a great job. In addition to his legal duties, he is managing the Baltic Bangers account,
Good.
and he has more free time because I am spending a lot of time with his wife. So, he's got time on his
That's
hands.
good. I'm glad to hear.
He's
Uh,
managing it well, though. Um,
but yeah, I guess I appreciate that. I appreciate that from you. Um, Dan, I appreciate that from Lomez. I mean, like to be at risk of sincere posting for a second, like I it I I don't engage with these sort of ideas to be edgy. Like being
Yeah.
edgy is fun, but like ultimately I believe what I believe because I want like a good future for humanity.
yeah,
Like I
Yeah.
believe in this country and I believe in like, you know, peace, order, and prosperity to ultimately
sure.
like lead to flourishing human happiness. And like I don't think that campaigns of racial extermination or, flagrant warmongering are really like conducive to that. So like
Yeah,
I actually like it means something to me when people are willing to draw lines, like there's this guy that I mostly disagree with, but I read his shit because it's interesting. And I think that that is something that I'd say probably 80% of Americans can't do these days, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But John Arcto, he writes the Anglo-Futurist on Substack,
oh
and he
yeah,
had this
where I
whole
follow him.
yeah. He did this very great like um sort of like taxonomy of the right and like all these different like subgroups of it. And he had this whole argument for like no enemies on the right. Like we all have to band together no matter how extreme. And I found myself thinking I can't do that. I can't. I mean, one,
Yeah,
I'm not even white. Like, it's pretty stupid to sort of associate with white supremacists, when it's you that is going to be ejected from your
yeah,
country. And two, I sort of have to draw the line on the right for the same reason I draw the line on the left, which is at a certain point, I go, your ideas are stupid and terrible, and they're going to be
Yeah.
harmful for our country, right?
yeah.
So anyway, that's it. I
There,
guess I like
there's just oh god, sorry.
I like the intellectual environment that's being fostered, and I like what people are doing, this year and last year, and I look forward to seeing it continue.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Absolutely. There's an element of credibility as well. I think Matt, you and I talked about this, where people kind of like hard right people, like talk a big game, and it's like, well, okay, but that's not the way you live your life. That's
Yeah.
not the way you would not be ready for the world that you're, imagining you want.
And then it's
So
LARPing to some degree.
There's
I
a
mean,
lot of
it's
that. Yeah. I mean,
the
I think
meme
we,
of
yeah.
like, go ahead.
No, no, you go ahead.
Oh, the meme of, behind every neo-Nazi is like the Hispanic chief, right?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we have to be critical of people for being stupid or hypocritical. I don't even want to wade into any particular debates, but you see this a lot with
Yeah.
people kind of going after like the Nick Fuenteses of the world. It's not that they're punching right so much as they're just pointing out some of the silliness and the dubiousness of some of the alliances. I mean, I don't want to make this a anti-Groiper thing at all, but just you see people where I don't think of it as punching right. I think of it much more as like pointing out the silly elements and things, which I
keeping
think we have
everyone
to do.
honest in a
Yeah,
way.
Yeah.
And I mean also the idea of this kind of like tough guy, like I'm, truly based or whatever. Like it's like, okay, we're talking about this on Twitter. No one on Twitter is truly based. You're thinking about memes and thinking about like how to, be funny. Like
Yeah.
there are truly based guys out there. They're not memeing on Twitter. They're like
Yeah.
living their lives. So
Yeah. And I
There,
can,
yeah.
yeah, I go on. I can agree with the sentiment of like not making issues to the right, as it were. Like, I'm not going to make a platform going after like some weird fringe accounts that say stuff I disagree with.
I will leave
Um,
that to the ADL. They can do that on their own
yeah,
time and
yeah,
money.
exactly. So I agree with kind of having some degree of a united front. It's important, but at the same time, there's a lot of it's a lot of those people who kind of a lot of people that are further to the right who actually end up going after more center, slightly more center oriented people for being grifters and all this. So a lot of the infighting I think actually comes from that other direction.
I also think that you can be a grifter with any set of opinions. I mean,
Yeah.
like when I actually go down the list of like what Hanania believes in, I'm like, okay, on paper this is reasonable. But then I encountered him and I just get such like a viscerally revolting
Yeah.
reaction. You
No, and
know?
even some of like the further right ideas I think have become more of a grift. Like the whole thing, especially with like certain JQ stuff, like was like, oh, we can't talk about this. Like anyone who like eh, I think increasingly you see people really building like a well-moneyed audience based on being willing to touch that rail. And the only reason I bring that up is to say literally anything can become a grift if you present it the right way.
I think it's been so, I don't know if funny's the right word. I guess funny. It's been very surreal watching sort of online dissidents on both sort of the commie side and the right wing side sort of like semi invert over like Judaism and Israel since October
Yeah.
7th. I
No,
feel
it's
like
been
it
yeah.
absolutely like just like you know MMA flipped everybody who considers themselves an online extremist like on their head.
Yeah,
Um,
I've been relatively quiet about this. I'm, half Jewish, so
yeah.
incredibly so and like reasonably so, people could just say like, well, you're biased, and yeah, I am. So I don't talk about it as much, but like it's hilarious to me how people who are like on the left, like Jewish people on the left after this happened, are like, wait a minute. You're not with me.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't think
I
I
thought
would be
we're
under the
coalition
steamroller. Yeah.
members.
It's very much the sort of like the leopards eating face meme that, the left likes to use, but about them in that case.
It's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute,
I
I'm
know.
not a white
I'm
guy.
not
And then
white.
it's
Wait,
like
I'm
telling
not
the white
white.
people,
Yeah.
hey, I am a white guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely yeah. It's like no refunds. Sorry. You know, like where were you when this was happening to, Asian Americans who were not being admitted to universities for like 30 years, you know? Like
Yeah.
you were all
Yeah,
about that.
exactly.
Whatever.
It's yeah, I mean, I think it will be seen as a real inflection point. I mean, I know a lot of Jewish people who are now like who wouldn't have voted for Trump before, but might or will now. And yeah, I mean, I think it, to an extent was probably a wake-up call for some people who you know, had more status-based allegiances, but then realized, okay, let's rethink this. This might not be good for me in the long term, et cetera, et cetera. Like Bill Ackman would be, I think, a great example. The hedge fund guy who,
Yeah.
in the wake of, suddenly. So yeah, it. I think it will be seen as a turning point of sorts.
Yeah. But
Hmm.
in the short run, it's like so messy and there's so much I think confusion and people not being sure exactly where they stand and realistically probably being hypocritical as well. But I think in the long run, it will be an inflection point that will hopefully lead to greater clarity for some people. But
Yeah, I feel like I've seen like the usage of like Zog as a pejorative by like anon accounts has gone down like probably like 20x in the past couple years, and I feel like that reflects the sort of broader like turn away from like Zionist focused conspiracy theories on the right.
Probably. I mean, it depends what part of the right you're talking. I mean, if we're
I
talking about the
guess maybe
greater
maybe
BAP
I've just
sphere.
created a bubble. I've
No, no.
created a
I mean,
bubble.
we all do to a certain extent. I think, by cliche, but also by reality, kind of more. I guess the corner of the dissident right that this podcast is in has, I think, moved pretty significant. Not
I mean,
not in
everybody's
a
Jewish,
hand-wringing
so
way. Exactly. So it's like just a sensible distance from it. But meanwhile, I think kind of the more America First crowd has leaned much more toward it to the point of being allied with further left elements that
and
may
it,
have a
that
similar
almost
view. Yeah.
makes me imagine like, we're like this corner being in its own sort of bubble where it's like kind of like the Israeli Jew on the left being like, wait, but I'm one of the good guys. Like, it's funny the extent to which like sort of urban elite dissident right people are still urban and elite
Yeah.
and like very like sort of like coded in a lot of those sort of elite left ways. And like if there was truly sort of like a fully like rural like MAGA insurgency, and you're like, wait, like yeah, I eat caviar, but look, I'm based,
Yeah, I
like is
wonder
that gonna
about that.
save you?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Um,
It's the Grunhauer effect.
yeah, no, some of
Um,
those, a lot of MAGA people I feel like are actually kind of salt of the earth and big tent in a way where it would be fine.
Yeah, I mean they worship
Um,
the Trumps, and which is like the epitome of that. So
yeah,
that
basically.
makes me think
But
that that would be okay. Yeah, go
the
ahead.
more like MAGA communist element, which that's not, it's just a meme really. But who's that? Is that poster who kind of invented that? I don't remember his name. He's a good example of a sort of
hmm.
very spicy, but still very much a grifter. Do you guys know who I'm talking about? There's like a name.
I've
It's not
seen
something I
the
follow.
term MAGA communism, but
Yeah.
I haven't traced to patient zero.
Anyway, yeah, whatever.
No.
But like the main point of that being is that that's just a meme that has very little relevance to real life. However, if that was a thing, yeah, I don't think maybe any of us would be treated especially well by it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
also
Yeah,
it's not a real
right.
possibility because I actually don't find, I mean, I don't know. I was about to say that I don't find MAGA people at their core to be like revolutionary or radical at all. They really just want to grill, but at the same time,
Yeah,
you do have like, they're the Q people did storm the Capitol unironically IRL in real life. So, they count
true.
for something, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. You
Um,
never know.
I think that was part of, by the way, just on Civil War, I meant to say, part of the sort of critique of the sort of um, like resist lib rhetoric that was coming from Garland was, with the whole storming of Washington, he was like, look, like you guys would also do a January 6th,
Yeah,
like you have
Interesting.
no high
yeah.
ground
Yeah.
in that regard.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know if I give Garland the credit to think that he was thinking that, but he showed it,
Oh, I
regardless
think
of
he
whether,
was.
yeah.
I mean,
Do you think he was? Okay, yeah.
yeah, the people he chose, the sort of like very like cookie cutter, like TV ad diverse special forces team, with
Yes.
the black woman who
That was
shoots
well noted.
Offerman, and
Yeah.
she's like grinning and like throwing up her peace signs. Like it's supposed to come off as like sociopathic. I think. I
Yeah.
really think
Okay.
that was the
Interesting.
intent.
Interesting. That wasn't my interpretation, but I like
Mm.
your interpretation.
Maybe I'm
Since
giving him too
we've
much credit.
maybe, but it's cool. I mean, I don't know. Since we've ambulated back to Civil War, we can maybe half ambulate back to Komodo a little bit.
Sure.
And maybe this is a dumb question, but I'm going to ask you another recent movie, which is more than just a movie, but was Dune first of all, what do you think of Dune Part Two, or in that whole series? And then I hadn't thought of this before hopping on today, but kind of
Mhm.
talking about the more not messianic, but how your lead character Basra is her name, right?
Yeah, yeah,
How she becomes sort of a, without spoiling anything, a figurehead
yeah,
that
yeah.
reminded me of this sort of Atreides plot line. So it was Dune. How
I
much does Dune loom for you? And I mean, yeah, just what do you think of the newer movies too?
I like the movies. I like Villeneuve. I think he unfortunately, my friends and I, we like to sort of talk about who does or doesn't have the sauce in terms of being able to make something sort of provocative and like, you know, violently and sexually unrepressed in a way that is like honest and libidinal. I'd say Nutcrackers definitely has the sauce in that regard.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
Villeneuve, I really like him. I think that he's a little too repressed to truly cook in that regard.
Yeah, man. I always like to hear your thoughts on movies because they're always interesting and ring true. I would agree. You know what I mean? I like
Yeah,
Dune. I like the newer movies. I like Timothy Chalamet as a performer. There's a
yeah.
lot of things that some people, even Zendaya, like I don't really have an issue with in the movie. Like a lot of things that people criticize Dune for, I don't
Canceled.
necessarily.
You're gonna get
Yeah,
canceled for saying you like
I
Zendaya.
know. Well, I liked Challengers. I thought was pretty good. But anyway, not even to talk too much about Zendaya, but a lot of things that people criticize Dune for, I don't necessarily agree with. But I think on a fundamental level, what you said is true. He doesn't have
Yeah.
the sauce. He doesn't like,
And,
for
and,
example, I
and
don't really like David Lynch's Dune that much. It's pretty messy, but like it has the sauce. Like that movie is gets under
Yes.
your
yes.
skin in a way that
I will
neither.
say he killed Blade Runner 2049. You know,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that this sort of like the repression of like, like being a cucked robot is basically already the lived experience for like young men. Like that's the reason that that movie like resonated so much is because people saw this movie about this cucked robot and they were like, that's me. So
literally me.
he
Yeah,
yeah, he found something there. But I will say, as far as Dune and Komodo, I mean, obviously the Villeneuve movies did not come out when this was written. I had read the book. I read it in high school. Um,
yeah.
I
That's more what I
think
was
that
asking was the book. I knew the movies hadn't come out,
if
but
they
yeah,
seem similar, it's probably because they're both like sort of talking about the relationship between like the Near East and the West in a
yeah,
sci-fi context.
yeah,
So like just by virtue of that, there are going to be similarities, right? Because ultimately, like if we're talking about like, what does Islam do in the face of like Western liberal imperialism or lack thereof, right? Like, and you apply that to like spaceships, there's going to be similarities. But honestly, I would say no. I would say to me,
yeah.
reading Dune in high school, it was very sort of medieval, Like it's very much like trying to be this story about like great houses and the rise and fall of father and son in this like sort of Game of Thronesy way where it's sort of throwing back to like more you know, pre-modern ways of being and I wanted Komodo to be very much about our life today. So in that sense I
Yeah.
would say no.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't necessarily think the answer would be yes. I was just curious,
Yeah.
and again, I think this will almost exhaust really the conversation on Komodo. Although I'll add on your behalf, and you can add it again at the end. The call to action. People should go buy this book on Amazon, available today.
Yeah. Or you can
Komodo,
read it with Kindle Unlimited.
Komodo. Yeah, I was gonna say you. Yeah, actually,
Mm-hmm.
I was on Amazon. I wanted to point out you acknowledge there's no paperback yet, but there is Kindle and Kindle Unlimited, so you
Mm-hmm.
can technically read it for free if you sign up for a trial, which is always a nice
Mm-hmm.
little. I think we talked about this on our pod about how like that's a nice little half step where you can get a better version if
Yes.
you pay. But yeah, it's a good place to be.
And I will
Um,
say, just in the full transparency, because we wanted to talk about unit economics a little,
yeah,
of the 9.99 for a copy on Kindle, I get about $6.70, which is
Mm.
actually very good compared
it
to
is good.
other,
Yeah,
imprints. That's generous from Amazon. If you read it with Kindle Unlimited, you get the author gets about half a cent per page, which for Komodo comes out to a little over $2, which is something, but it's definitely like there are trade-offs to signing up for this sort of like, I don't know, it's almost like all you can eat sort of slop buffet system,
Yeah.
as far as like as an author, you're not seeing as much from a Kindle Unlimited reader compared to a buyer. But that being said, it was still important to me to do it because, as you said, especially for an unknown author, a debut author, I think it's good to have sort of stepping stone ways to um, let new readers find it. A lot of
Yeah.
Kindle Unlimited readers are very like habitual readers. About 80% basically just read like women's erotica, but the last 20% read like regular books. And if they're gonna read it and they're gonna leave a review and that helps get visibility, it can always come off Kindle Unlimited later, right? So that's
Yeah,
part of the
right. And I mean,
psychology
I've
for me.
literally read books entirely or mostly on Kindle and then decided to buy a physical copy because I liked
Yeah,
them
so am
enough.
I. Yeah,
These things, one does not need to make a firm decision about how they're going to read. And also like with Kindle Unlimited, it's convenient, you can just read. If you don't have the copy with you, you can pull a thing up. So it's
And
good that we
besides,
have, what's
if you
up?
are a new right listener, you are obviously a man of means and high station, so you can
that's
afford
right.
to buy Cairo's book, buy a patrician copy.
That's
This man
correct.
deserves it, and you deserve it.
Thank you, Dan. That's what I
Um,
meant to say. This is a book for our guys.
Absolutely. The last question I want to ask, but then maybe it's hard. I mean, you can answer it however you want, but you kind of acknowledge there's like a theme of ethnicity in the book, and your
Yeah,
character is kind of, I don't, she's not mixed ethnicity, but
she is.
she is mixed ethnicity, and
She
she's
is
kind
half
of
and half.
working for one world that would,
Yeah,
there's a little bit of this like,
yeah,
are you with us or against us element.
yeah,
Um, to whatever extent you would like, and you also talk about kind of the East versus West
yeah.
themes explored. If you just want to unpack that to whatever extent you'd like, in terms of what drew you to write about that and sort of how it begins to play out without giving spoilers.
Yeah, again, it sort of all ties back to um, the sort of really the ISIS terror wave and the Islamic fundamentalism of the mid 2010s, and that sort of experience of being a Westerner and being kind of, you know, Middle Eastern, kind of North African, kind of a person of color, also being white and kind of not, and it's I joke that like the thing about being racially ambiguous is that people assume you're whichever one they like least. Um, but to some degree, it's true in that you're always sort of like a foot out the door from whatever group of people you're in. If people are organizing ethnically, right? And so a lot of this character's experience is sort of like dealing with like they'll be out there and they'll be doing these anti-terror raids, because the government is too inept to do anything about it. So she's out there and they're boots on the ground raiding these
Hmm.
asteroids, and they'll bring in this teenager who's trying to do a terror bombing, and he'll talk to her in his in ancestral language and say like, you're the worst of all because you're a race traitor essentially, and we're gonna get you. And she's gonna say like, you're a fucking animal. You disgust me. Like,
Hmm.
don't talk to me in that language. And essentially go even further with her hatred than anyone else, even though that is in part her. And at the same time, she's going to turn around, she's going to be in a room of bureaucrats and they're going to be casting suspicion on her because of, being not
Yeah.
quite them. And it's like, don't don't try to put me in that box. I'm better than you. You can't define me that way, right? And both of
Yeah.
these come from like a great degree of insecurity. Like they're not like sort of just like there's sort of like a pathology to like ethno narcissism of like thinking that your ethnicity is like the source of your value.
Yeah.
That I think we see a lot, especially with sort of
Right.
social justice stuff. There's sort of like I don't know, there's almost like a different sort of twisted version to investing too much in mixed identity, where it's like there's no one like me and that makes me the best, which is also this sort of
Yeah.
like very vain narcissism,
Yeah, no, it's
combined with this insecurity of like there's no one like me and so I'll always be alone, right? Which is the great fear. And
yeah,
I wanted to
yeah.
explore those things.
No, I think it's really, really interesting. And you kind of, said earlier, like, oh, it's a bit of an inversion of the cliche Twitter book. We're
Yeah.
writing about cis hetero white guy issues thing. But like, let's face it, there's very, very interesting things and very, very relevant things in our world to be explored there, since so many of us are mixed in varying
Yeah.
degrees, even in people who are not literally ethnically mixed, maybe have various,
Yeah,
tie-ins or
you've
hang-ups
talked to
or
me about your religious identity and how you kind of feel in between worlds on that, Matt, which is really
absolutely,
interesting.
yeah. Which I think
Yeah.
comes across in the Black Album a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we all get there. It ties into that thing we were talking about earlier, how like there's so many people who are of full or actually more commonly partial Jewish descent on this
Yeah.
corner of the dissident right. I mean, it actually is very relevant to that in my opinion. And the way I mean, I don't even want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but a lot of these accounts this morning, people are posting their 23andMe's where it's like, oh yeah, I'm a third Jewish and blah blah blah. And then you have
Oh
some of these
yeah.
groypers who are like, oh, what's with this? And it's like, well, it actually makes total sense to me that people who are kind of part of a more Nietzschean right, which is less like blood and soil to the nation or
Yes.
religion, there is this kind of slightly outsider status right wing
Exactly.
thing going on. These are very, very relevant questions in short.
I
So
mean
yeah,
the yeah. The stereotype I feel like of the I remember going a little back pre ISIS to sort of like the wave of school shootings. I think about like the obviously there was Elliot Rodgers, but like the Umpqua Community College shooter in um, Oregon, he was mixed race. I believe he was half black, raised by a single mom, downwardly mobile, and like sort of getting obsessed with this sort of like conservative, like ultra nationalism, like identity politics, while also like being completely ethnically adrift. And it's
yeah,
like that's the kind of like the brown white supremacist meme, like people who did, or like the trad family guy, like how many of these trad accounts are coming from divorced homes, and they're
tons. Yeah,
like trying to undo the pain of that sort of alienation, right, in their
yeah,
in their
it's
beliefs.
absolutely. So I think yeah, even though your book is more specifically comes at it from the kind of ethnic angle, but like
Yeah.
yeah, religion and just kind of family background comes into it a lot. Not without getting too personal or talking too much down a rabbit hole. Like for me with Catholicism is kind of interesting online because there's this strong trad calf thing and it's a bit of a cliche but I think it's true that like so few of these like really strongly identifying Catholics actually were brought up that way whereas I kind of was and like ironically the fact that I kind of was is the reason I can't like fully embrace it now in certain respects um you know without getting too far into to all of the nuances I think yeah, there's a lot of I don't know, confusion's the wrong word. There's a lot of people trying
For
different elements of
meaning,
identity. What's that?
searching for meaning or searching for
Searching for
belonging.
meaning, and then when you're doing it online, especially, which this isn't
Yeah.
as relevant to Komodo because she's not online, she's duking it out in real life. But when you're doing it online, especially, you're always presenting like a partial truth about yourself. I think. So
Yeah.
it's very hard to do it like in a fully integrated way online, I think. So all of this is to say with regard to Komodo, I think far from it being like, oh, like this is a book that has kind of a diversity angle. It's I mean it does, but it's coming at it from a really interesting and honest place. And my issue with like quote unquote woke diversity stuff is because it's not coming at it from an interesting
Yeah.
or honest place. And yeah.
I'll say this. I sort of, the reason I have such a visceral, nauseous reaction to that stuff is because the idea of, a publisher or an agent or, what a film studio or whatever sort of trying to tick boxes and create like a little like essentially try and like use representation as like
Hmm.
ideological symbols, or like as like signaling to identity. It's
Yeah.
just like my immediate reaction as a contrarian is like, don't tell me what to do, you know?
Yeah.
Like, don't you
Yeah.
dare tell me to change the color of this character
Yeah.
because that's everything. That's going to affect the way they go through the world. If I change that, it's not the same person anymore. And if it's not the same character, then it's not my work,
Yeah.
And it's like, and the sort of the racial uh, hierarchization, like where implicitly like if this is about a character of XYZ ethnicity, it's going to be worth more, right? And so I didn't turn away from all that stuff just to come find a place where it's the same but opposite, like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I'm not
No.
interested in joining a scene where like this book is more worthy because it's about a white person, like I
Yeah.
just want people to be writing shit that like is honest and is like what's from their heart and actually like engage with it as far as like who they are,
Yeah. No, no, completely. Yeah, that's maybe we could unpack it more. Your piece writing on the night shift kind of talks about how
Yeah.
people literally trying to change elements was part of what turned you off of
Yeah.
the mainstream literary agenting world. And yeah, I would definitely hope that this corner of things would never be anything equivalent. I don't think it is, thankfully.
And I've grown a thick
Um
enough skin at this point that I don't care, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I care, but I'm not going to fold to what somebody else wants from my work in that
No,
way. It's
definitely.
just not what
Yeah.
I'm interested in.
Well,
And
before we wrap, I definitely want to talk about your newer piece, Hunters, which I thought
sure.
was really good. I just tweeted it out. And you admit some inspiration from me and from the Black Album with regard to this,
I
which
do.
I
It's just a
find very
big
flattering.
kind
Yeah.
of Ouroboros of circle jerkdom here among our corner.
It is a bit of
Um,
that, but I will say, like, because thematically this was new territory for you, like it's very cool. Like you're right, you write very well and very fast. It seems like you kind of turned this story around just about a week after we did our pod, which is very
yeah.
impressive to me. But so it's your typical, you're always a good writer, but it was cool to see you kind of take on a different theme, and in my case specifically a theme that I was familiar with. It's a great story and people should read it. But if you just want to talk about Hunters a little bit, how that came to be, and then also just kind of your future writing, your ongoing publishing on Futurist letters, which includes your own fiction.
Sure, yeah, I'll try and do a good job shilling myself. Thank you, Matt. It's true that Hunters, that short story, came out of reading the Black Album, reading Strange Flows, and then meeting with Matt and seeing, what a talented artist he is. And,
Thank you.
I'm just trying to have fun. Honestly, like if we're not having fun as
Yeah.
artists, what's the point? Because it doesn't pay very well. So we have to at least be enjoying it for the sake of it. And yeah, I just sort of I try to I was saying to my friend the other day, sometimes I feel like I'm pretending to be like manic in that, there's this way that like Kanye West just kind of like chases his impulses with
Yeah.
complete sort of like unhealthy artistic abandon. And it's like, wow, like I want like if I feel that, like even like just a trace of that, like I want to chase whatever it is, no pun intended, is making me
Yeah.
feel that way. So I literally came back from uh doing that Strange Flows episode, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. This is this whole thing I had never even thought about before. I want to try. It's like watching someone
Yeah.
like going to the range and watching someone shoot like a really cool gun. It's like, wow, I want to try and shoot that gun,
Yeah.
so then I just sort of jumped in to see what I could do. But yeah, Hunters is it, I I lived in the valley for a while, the San Fernando Valley, and now I don't. And so it was a lot of sort of recent nostalgia for that,
Yeah.
looking back on an earlier phase in my life. And it was also just kind of playing with. There's actually a big cult element in Komodo as well. I think cults are something that just are always going to play in my work. And as
Same.
far as
Yeah.
Futurist letters, my New Year's resolution at the beginning of this year was to post more, which is like everyone has told me that's kind of demented because they're trying to post less. But I actually, believe it or not, my default mode is to be very offline and just be
Yeah.
writing and nothing else. So I said, okay, you have to be like in the arena socially if you want to like meet people. So actually post on your Twitter, make a Substack, and my what I told myself was once a week, you're either going to run someone else's piece or you're going to run your own piece. 52 weeks this entire year. Just to get some
Nice.
reps in, you know? And I've been sticking to that too. It's June and I've been
Yeah,
doing that.
it's
And
impressive. You really, not to blow smoke up your ass. I don't know. It seems like you're really good at kind of committing to things and then doing them. I mean, your Twitter's kind of blown up and your Substack is kind of blown up, and
oh,
you seem to write very fast. I can't emphasize that enough. And in a way that doesn't compromise on quality, and it's really cool. Yeah.
well, it's been a
To
long time coming. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
to tie it into the article you wrote, writing on the night shift,
Yeah,
part of writing fast, if you have a full-time job, is going to be, and you talk about it in this article, writing during odd hours,
yeah.
writing at night, writing on the job. So what has been your experience with that? And how do you integrate that into, the rest of your life?
Yeah, well, in school, I wrote a lot when I was supposed to be, studying or doing homework, which was not great for me as a student, but it was great for me as a writer.
Yeah.
Um, in various jobs, as you said, I would try and find time to. Apologies to anyone who's been my boss who's listening to this, but find time to write during quiet hours.
Mhm.
Um, this past couple years was actually probably the least prolific of my life in a while because I was head of marketing for a startup, and that
Mm.
was pretty time intensive. But I stepped away from that in February, and so freelancing. The thing about freelancing and entertainment is like when you're working, the money's pretty good, and when you're not working, you're just worried about working again, and you're having to make the money from when you were working kind of tied you over.
Yeah.
So it actually lends itself pretty well to writing because instead of just hand wringing and worrying about getting the next job, you go, okay, I have 3 weeks before I start the next show. I'm gonna crank out 30,000 words, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having
So
that space is very helpful, I find. Like, as I said, I wrote Nutcracker when I wasn't really working.
yeah,
Like, I was employed, but COVID had, decimated the ability to get work. So, yeah, it's, like, at least for me, having that kind of space to think, and like it is very admirable, reading that article that you were able to write while you were, not to like, anger any former employers
yeah.
while you're working,
No, it's
which
fine. I feel like capturing little market inefficiencies is honestly kind of part of the way to go. Like, for example, that store didn't sell any couches after 5 p.m. because nobody's buying a couch at night, but the mall we were in required us to keep the same hours as all the other businesses.
There you
So
go.
that's an example of that sort of like,
That's how you make your
you
own
know,
universal
that
basic income as a writer.
arbitrage.
Yeah.
Exactly. So my advice to someone, especially if they don't have a family who's trying to be a writer, is get a job that is as little mentally demanding as possible so you
Hmm.
can write at work. I mean, I recently, I passed like night security guards and like parking garage attendants who are like sitting in their little shack, you know, and they're usually just watching like soccer on their phone. But I pass them and I go like, man, I would be writing so many novels if I had your job, man.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah. That's how
know,
you got to
so
do it. You got
like
to learn the tricks. Yeah.
you got to kind of live on less. Again, if you're young, if you don't have a family, live on less and carve out the space one way or another, is what I would say.
Yeah, no, it's really, really good and
absolutely.
important advice. On that note, I think we've kind of covered this, but it's definitely it was on the agenda. The one of the unique, and Cairo, you and I talked about it on our pod, and Dan, we've just talked about it in general because it's kind of a position as being self-published or even like indie lit writers, like you're kind of forced to vertically integrate, as you put it
Yes.
in writing on the night shift. And you have to become your own marketer, which thankfully that's something you personally have experience with, but you have to,
Hmm.
learn how to market your own books. You know, learn how to design your own books. Ascari Productions, which you're at the helm of. But
Hmm.
you do have some helpers, seems like it's really well set up to kind of, yeah, vertically integrate and do a lot of these things. And then I guess somewhat related to the vertical integration question, you had a really interesting long tweet the other week about your promotion plan, kind of laying out how much each thing would cost for Komodo, involving coming on podcasts like this, your sort of
Free.
posting plan. Yeah, free to come on this pod, of course.
So
And
you
but also,
think.
yeah,
Oh,
right, right,
I'm
right.
paying later. Well, am I
Yeah.
paying or, am I receiving? I don't know. Uh, anyway.
Yeah, and I guess the only other tidbit to get in there is you are going to do an ad campaign on, I think, the Meta, right?
Yeah,
So
so
you
that
are
goes
doing
out
some
across
advertising, which
Facebook and Instagram.
I don't
Hmm.
think Dan or I have ever done that. You'll have to tell us how successful it is, because
It's hard for
perhaps
literary
we
fiction.
should be.
It
Yeah,
is because the masses like the more degrees away from Marvel you go, like the more confused and sort of befuddled and uninterested the Facebook users of the world are. So,
yeah,
like you were talking about this like this sort of Star Warsy genre element, like
yeah,
there is a way that makes it easier to say, okay, this has one foot in literary, but it also has one foot in genre fiction, which makes it a little more viable to promote as like a mass market book. Yeah, as far as vertically integrating, look, you have to have a good cover. It's never been easier than today to make a good cover. And good doesn't just mean it looks good or gets clicks. Good means it communicates. How do I say this? A good cover stands out to the people who would love your book, and it tells them that they would love your book. Because you're trying to do two things. You're trying to maximize the clicks from people who would love your book. You're also trying to, believe it or not, minimize clicks from people who would hate your book. Because if you're selling your book to people who end up going, what the fuck is this? This is not what I thought it was from the cover. You're going to tank your Amazon reviews. You're going to end up in the wrong algorithmic circles. Like that's
Yeah.
part of why like in-group and out-group signaling is so good. That's actually I've been thinking about Terror House and I've been thinking about the Nutcracker cover.
yeah,
And there's this sort of vector style, usually with a woman. I mean, there's Nutcracker. But there's also like delicious tacos.
right.
There's Welcome to
Welcome to
Hell.
hell.
That's sort of it creates like a visual language with the
Yeah.
reader where it's like if you like this, you might like that. You know what I mean? And that's like crucial. That's crucial. Matt and I were actually talking about Dragon Day,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
how to like find a cover. And Matt, thinking about it some more, I really like the sort of the sketch I did for that alt Dragon Day cover. I
Yeah,
don't know. It might be worth exploring something a little more graphic and a little more terror housey, just to sort of fully communicate to this subculture that
yeah,
that's where it belongs. It's a very tricky thing, but you have to have good art. You have to have a good blurb. Um, and then you just have to be around, meaning not
yeah.
selling your book, although you do a masterful job selling your book. Dan, honestly, you should be the one giving the
Right.
spiel because you've sold far more copies than me in my life.
Yeah.
So
Matt
gonna
Matt Forney should thank me.
I'm gonna close it off here, and I'm gonna say I will have much more to say about this once I've actually had a novel out for a few weeks, and I want to hear what you have to say about online promotion, Dan. Like,
Yeah,
what's the
he is
secret?
kind of the king of it. Yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, it sounds trite, but having fun.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Gotta be having
there's
fun.
no Nutcracker promos that I'm doing where I'm like, oh God, I have to promote Nutcracker again. Like, I love the novel, I love the title,
Yeah.
and I enjoy tweeting, which maybe, people, not everyone does, but if you do, it's certainly helpful to your promotional aims. And that will kind of shine through in the way you promote it. But
Yeah.
beyond that, more practical advice is just have a title of the novel that lends itself to puns or
Oh yeah.
various memes and stuff of that nature.
Hmm.
So yeah, get
No,
that
that's
nut, the nut army, et
Nut,
cetera, et
so
cetera.
we're
so
such
simple,
tribal
but yeah, go on.
creatures.
Yeah.
Like, I see Nut Army. I'm like, I want to be in the Nut Army. You know? Like, it's just,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. It's such a simple thing that you just said, Dan. I don't even know how to apply it to my own books because I'm just a different kind of writer. But I'll have to do some soul searching on that. But in addition to all having a woman on the cover, Welcome to Hell the Pussy and Nutcracker all have memeable covers. It's like
Yeah.
tacos used to be like $1 pussy, whatever. And then
Yeah.
Welcome
Yeah.
to Hell it was like already a meme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Billy's
Yeah,
good
that's
at it
that's part
too.
of all of it. Yeah.
That's true. That's
I mean,
very astute.
I can't think of what I would do with Dragon Day, and there's nothing, but that's okay.
There's
I
I'll
mean,
figure out a different.
dragging these nuts, right? I don't know.
Yeah. Just like it's also not a comedic novel, so it's like
No,
that maybe is a disadvantage, but
there's
it's
an
neither is the
not.
interesting
pussy really. So I don't
story
know. Yeah.
with the cover of Nutcracker where I was working with Matt Lawrence, who's the art director for Terror House, also did
Yeah.
our logo, the New Right logo, and I was working with him to design the cover. Originally, I wanted Spencer on the cover, but
Mm.
like I thought about it and I realized keep it simple. No one wants to see some dude on the cover. They want to see a hot girl. Just you do that, put her in lingerie with a pussy hat. That's all you
Yeah.
need. And
It's perfect.
honestly, yeah, it
It
like
tells you what you're getting.
yeah, Nutcracker, the cover to me is perfect. Some people have said that it is like not literary enough. They're afraid
No,
to
it's
have it
great.
out like on their coffee table. But I mean, I think that's kind of part of the joy of the book
Yeah.
itself.
100%. Yeah.
No, I love having it out because people look at it and they see the orange and gray and they're degenerates and they know what's going on.
They
And
know.
they're,
They
yeah, they
yeah,
know and they
Brazzers.
know and we know they know and they know we know they know. And they're like Nutcracker and I get to say, oh, it's really good. It's a literary novel by this guy Dan Baltic. And then
Yeah.
we've sort of put literary novels in this very like sort of like their literary novels are so sacred to like sort of the like lib
The NPR
managerial,
class.
yeah, the NPR class exactly,
Yeah.
that like it's like an absolute ace to play and then they're just like,
Oh yeah.
oh, okay, and then they have
Yeah, you're
nothing to say
supposed
back to
to
that.
have like a
Yeah.
tasteful cover with like a kind of very like bare bones sketch of a
Yeah.
bird or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, I want a porn logo. I want a girl in lingerie wearing a pussy hat. I want her to look like Billie Eilish. So I sent a photo of Billie Eilish.
Oh, I didn't even
And
realize that
yeah,
I
somehow.
didn't think that's alpha. That's not alpha.
the one thing that I will say where maybe I cucked a little bit on the cover was Crystal is not supposed to be as attractive as Billie Eilish in the book, but I realized like I cannot put an unattractive girl on the cover of the novel. That's just gonna hurt sales. No one
I
wants
think
to
you
buy it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
think
well,
I'm
you
just like,
struck a
fuck it.
good
It's Billie
balance.
Eilish.
Billie Eilish is a perfect balance striker, shall we say,
A beautiful
between
mid, as it were, or a
yeah,
real
yeah,
mid. Uh-huh.
exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, the one thing that I noticed, and I will now that I actually have Dan here in front of me, I was wondering, and this is, maybe I was just misreading. I was looking, I was going, where are her cheek piercings?
Yeah, no,
Right?
it's not
Right.
Crystal. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like it is in like style or essence, but she
Uh-huh.
is not supposed to be as attractive as Billie Eilish.
Got it. Okay.
But yeah, it's like no, I'm not. I'm not gonna have. I mean, like I legitimately would be less inclined to buy a book if I'm like, there's some ugly girl on the cover.
Oh
The
yeah, no,
tissues on the
100%.
back, the
Yeah.
tissues on the back are a really nice touch too.
Oh, thanks. Yeah,
Um,
that was actually Matt Lawrence. He's like, yeah, I'll put some tissue. And actually, I looked at it and I'm like, It's kind of gross, but all right.
But it gets the message across. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
I'm looking at this and reappreciating.
it
Yeah.
makes sure you never accidentally leave it face down because you don't want people seeing
True.
the tissues. So then it's
Yeah.
always face up on display, right? So
Yeah.
it's yeah.
I try for that.
Uh-huh.
Huh.
It's tactical.
Yeah, I
And
guess
that's
what's
actually
Okay.
the
gross.
case with many
Yeah.
of the novels that I read, just because they're like these, weird right-wing novel, or some books, whatever.
Yeah.
So like, friend of the pod, Konstantin von Hofmeister. I'm reading Esoteric Trumpism. Not only is it called Esoteric Trumpism, but it's
Yeah.
like Trump with like Duke Nukem style glasses on the
Yeah.
cover.
Yeah.
On the
And like when
cover.
I'm reading it on the subway, I'm like, I always make sure to have it like face down because
Oh
well,
yeah.
you know what a
You're
lightning rod this man is in New York City for some
braver
reason.
braver than me to even read that on the subway.
Yeah.
But
Wait, so
yeah.
I have a question for both of you that's very important and serious, which is when is the next book?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
So
want yeah.
I'm working on Nutcracker too.
Nutcracker 2.
It's gonna be a little while. It's like
Is it
yeah,
actually
the
Nutcracker 2?
oh yeah. Yeah, I mean I'm pretty sure
I
I
thought that
might
was a shit post.
oh no, I am working on it. Like it's
That's
actually
Yeah.
awesome.
I am planning to release it chapter by chapter on my Substack. I have essentially completed the prologue. I wanted to get more writing done, but my business has picked up and, just have been busy, but I want to get back on track and start plugging away at it. Essentially, the plot is things go, though the novel in the epilogue ends on a high note for Spencer. He, things go awry when he has a viral moment where I don't know if you recall, but there was an instance in New York City where a progressive activist was stabbed by a crackhead in front of his girlfriend. And
Yeah,
so a
that I
similar
remember that.
yeah, so a similar incident, because Spencer at the end of the novel becomes a de-radicalization speaker. He's
Uh-huh.
like a, successful liberal podcaster or
Yeah.
whatever. And he has a similar encounter. And being Spencer, he pushes his girlfriend into the crackhead and starts running away. And it's captured on viral video where he's screaming racial epithets as he's running away.
Oh
And he,
no. Gibsonian moment there.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
he's out of the de-radicalization racket, and so he's adrift once again. He has to figure out what to do, and so like any disgraced media personality, he joins New York City's Times Square.
Oh no. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I'm
Uh,
looking forward to it. I feel like especially since I mean I don't want to say anything I don't know if this is even true I'm not a hater. I don't want it to be true. It seems like Dime Square, not that the people in it are not continuing to do their thing. There's no one who's like disgraced or like fallen off. But it seems like Dime Square as a collective is finally starting to feel a tiny bit in the rear view. So I feel like the
yeah.
time is ripe. Owl of Minerva flies at dusk to
Do a
parody it or bring it
retrospective.
into a broader satire. Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm
Yeah.
speaking too soon, but it does kind of feel like a lot of the specific, while the specific actors from Dime Square are continuing on the idea of, I don't know if there's going to be another DeVere ball. It kind of feels like we're moving on from it. So I'm looking forward to that.
It's also one of those
Yep.
things where Dime Square is like hipster, right? No one wants to say they're Dime Square. No one wants to say like,
You're
"Oh
right.
yeah, this is a Dime Square party. I'm a Dime Square
Yeah.
partier." So like you can get away with satirizing Dime Square because no one's gonna say, "Oh me, I'm Dime Square."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's very much that sort of thing. Um, in terms of my own work,
Yeah.
this is first time I'm saying this. The Tukey's
Mhm.
Mad guys just did a great review of
Absolutely.
the Black Album. Obviously, I do have a book that came out recently, so
Mm-hmm.
pressure isn't too on, but of course I will have more work coming out soon. Anyway, Tukey's Mad guys, people should go check that out. It's now free, I think, on Patreon or wherever they distribute their pod. I did become a member to hear it a little bit early. They're great guys. You should check out their podcast. Anyway, one of the commentators on one of them, I don't remember which one. It wasn't Gabe, but it was either Cap or the other guy. Said that they hope that my next work will, because they like Dragon Day more than the Black Album, which fair enough. I mean, I think Dragon Day is the more sort of complete work. Black Album was always supposed to be more of like a Smashing Pumpkins Pisces Iscariot kind of endeavor, where it's a compilation of different things. And they said they'd hope to see a more long form fiction from me. I also hope and plan, of course, to eventually have more long form fiction. But you may have to sit through more, I guess, essays or like very personal style essays from me first. Because what I'm working on right now, and again, you kind of mentioned it earlier, Cairo, with regard to like you just kind of have to follow, in this Kanye kind of way, you just kind of got to follow the muse where it takes you. One of the things I enjoyed the most about writing the Black Album was kind of some of the more personal reflections on childhood. And look, I'm not really quite important enough of a person to release like a memoir, but I've kind of been in a moment of realizing I can just write very honestly and openly about, basically my youth and other periods of my childhood and my development, that I'm kind of really just enjoying delving into at this point. And I'm structuring it this way. I'm writing about, this was also kind of tied into the Black Album. I'm writing a book about music. I'm writing a kind of sort of Chuck Klosterman slash, Billy Pratt, since we brought him up, style thing, where through the lens of pop culture, in my case, I'm writing a book that, each chapter will be about a different artist, basically, that really strongly affected me at a different point in life. And I'm writing both about the work and its broader cultural, significations. I think I'm an adept enough critic that I can kind of write things that do speak to a broader audience culturally, but I'm also writing about myself and writing about being homeschooled. And eventually I'll be writing about how I came to this corner of the internet and how my politics changed and all these things that are very, I suppose it sounds almost egoic that I'm like writing about myself, but I would counter, all fiction is ultimately very personal, right? And in my case right now, just for its own sake, I've really been having a lot more sort of inspiration and ability just to write and write and write for hours a day.
Oh, great.
Kind of just both about myself and about the way that I feel I fit into the broader culture, not because I think I'm so important, but because I think, I'm a millennial from a certain period with certain time, certain moment with certain experiences that I think, I do think can be relevant to a broader reader base. So yeah, I'm writing a book about music that's nonfiction, that's about myself, that, it's kind of midway between, it's not autofiction, but it is very, very personal nonfiction. And if someone were to say like, oh, you should write more fiction like Dragon Day, I don't disagree, but I also feel like I have to write what I feel inspired to write. And right now it's very much that. And I don't know when that'll come out. I don't know how I'm going to promote it. I might even kind of release it quasi for free or release parts of it online, because again, I feel a little weird saying like, oh, buy my, life story stuff. But I've been pretty deep into that right now. So I think that's what's going to be next.
It's cool, man. You got to go with the flow, however strange.
Yeah.
I will say,
Totally.
dear listeners, if you haven't read the Black Album, I was reading this, and it's this very, very surreal mix of nonfiction and fiction. At points, it had me wondering. I was reading it because I was going to be meeting up with Matt, and at certain points I was like, "Is this man a serial killer?" Like it's a serious thought that goes through your head, and that speaks to the quality of his, his ability to sort of weave nonfiction and fiction.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the endorsement on that. But yeah, go on.
It goes without saying that I've known Matt for multiple years, and reading the Black Album, I was wondering, like, wait a minute, is some of this stuff real? And what is real and what isn't real? I'm like, the true crime podcast. I'm like, does Matt have a true crime podcast?
No, I have this podcast.
We do this podcast, and he has strange flows. Well, does he have something else that I don't know about? I think was actually fiction, but it is
Yes.
very interesting how you've like woven fictionalized reality with, actual personal essays with, actual fiction.
Well, thank
So
you. Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily something I completely recommend to anyone. And Cairo, I saw that you tweeted that you probably yourself would not publish fiction and nonfiction mixed.
no, which is
Um,
not to say it's a bad idea. I just, going back to the sauce, I don't know if I have that kind of sauce to pull it off.
well, what I'll say
But
is
you
I don't
definitely do.
know. Well, thank you, but yeah, I don't. It just kind of it. As with not to sound too new age about it, but I mean, I think as with a lot of art, like it just kind of happens. Like I don't think I ever planned like I'm going to write nonfiction and fiction together. It just kind of like made sense to do, and I'm glad to hear it was successful on some level. But it's not without its own risks and potential to confuse people. So I don't think it's going to be like some new paradigm that I can. I think it just lent itself to my specific moment of wanting to, stuff that was on theme, wanting to put it together and getting it out there. You really just have to, as you said, go with the flow.
I will say Tuki's sidebar, they compared it to and the work of an author who's like very well known in our scene, and I think influenced you, Matt, a bit, and influenced people that we know. And they concluded that it was far superior to his work, and I have to
Oh, I
agree.
well,
Yeah,
I don't know if I
I
can. It
yeah,
was
I don't
Mike Ma.
expect you
I
to
mean,
necessarily agree. Yeah,
that was flattering. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. That was probably the most flattering thing that I found. But maybe it's because I like Mike Mom more than others. I don't know. But
I mean, it's
yeah,
funny because I didn't necessarily compare them, but
it was a significant influence.
yeah,
That
and
kind of narrative, because Ma does the same thing where you can't tell what's fiction and
well,
nonfiction. Yeah,
exactly. And I realized, and this is something that, didn't necessarily occur to me, but the Black Album did more successfully did what I think he was trying to do. So
perhaps.
that's that's from my perspective,
Well,
and
thank you.
theirs apparently.
Um, well, I'm glad we could shill the Black Album a little bit on this pod. But
Okay,
Cairo,
man.
obviously, you literally just had your book come out today. But what
Yes.
knowing you, you probably are working on another long thing. So, I mean, to whatever you want to say about that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, currently I have a notes app document with everything that I want to publish of novel length, and I think this is going to sound absurd. I think there's 17 things on there.
It's
So
amazing.
Wow.
I calculated that it's going to take me about 5 or 6 years at least to get that done.
Oh,
But
I would think yes.
several of them, I've already written as screenplays.
Oh
Yeah.
wow.
Some of them actually have actually won like or placed highly in screenwriting competitions,
Nice.
like the Page Award
Oh,
and
that's a big one,
things like
from
that.
what I
Yeah,
understand.
that I think I would call it the second biggest one after the Nickel.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, and I hit this point. Kind of part of getting old enough to just not care anymore is like I believe in this stuff. I had fun making it. I want to share it with people. If nobody wants to make this into a movie for 5, 10, $15 million, then I'm gonna novelize it and
Yeah.
I can share it that way. And I know the story, and I think it would, as you said, Matt, go fast because I'm a quick author and I have the screenplay.
Yeah.
And this is a way to, one, make $200, two, share it with people who want to read my work, which is the best part, and three, sort of like get some emotional closure on it, because there's
Right. And
something
that's an
about
important
like
part, right?
a
Yeah.
screenplay that's not produced, sort of leaves this sort of lingering like lack of closure in your heart, I
Definitely.
feel like.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm currently working on a novel that's sort of a mid-century noir fantasy thing. That is a male protagonist that is much more of the sort of Arbogast-y, like androgenic fiction, because that was sort of the zeitgeist that I was getting pulled into when I started it.
Yeah.
I'm two-thirds of the way through that. My first beta reader, it's funny, we were talking about kind of like self-moderating, like how edgy you get. My first beta reader for a lot of my career has been my mom, who was also she was a professor of literature at Berkeley, and she also
Oh wow.
was a script reader at ICM.
Mm.
So I respect her opinion a lot on literature. And there's sort of a natural like, would I want my mom reading this
Mhm.
to anything that I run past her
Yeah.
that sort of filters through the work. And I honestly, I'm getting to the point where it might be a little borderline. Like with Hunters,
Yeah.
I was kind of like, should I text her and tell her not to read Futurist letters this week? And then I was like, oh, fuck it, whatever. Uh, but I may get to the point. I may get to the point where I write something that I don't run by my mom. But for now, I'm sort of sharing those chapters with her as I go. She's giving me notes, and my plan for that is I'm going to finish it. I have promised her that I will submit it to agents because she still believes in
Yeah.
the old system because the
Sure.
system was not as terrible when she was a young person.
Yeah.
So
And maybe
there's
it
this
could get
kind
better
of
again. We'll
yeah,
see.
it could get better again. It could get better again. So I've promised her I'm going to submit to agents, try and get that trad pubbed. It may or may not happen. If it doesn't, I will go back. I will hire an editor myself. I will do cover art myself. I will basically give it the Komodo treatment
Excellent.
and maybe get it, out on Kindle by the end of this year or next year. So that and everything else is underway. But for now, I'm just happy to
Excellent.
have Komodo out, and I'm happy to, I thought that the good thing about tweeting would be that it would drive traffic to my book. I actually don't really care about that. The much more rewarding thing has been making friends.
Yeah.
So,
Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I guess the
Yeah.
real book shelling was the friends we made along the way.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
on that
no.
note,
Absolutely.
guys.
I think it's a pretty good note to end on. Thanks so much for coming on. I'm happy to help you promote Komodo, and but as you said, more so happy to get to pal around for 2 hours here.
It's been
Absolutely.
good, Kyra.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Stay cool, guys, and we'll
All
talk
right.
again
Yeah, we'll
sometime.
talk again soon. Take care.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.